In the previous video, we looked at using Inkscape to turn a bitmap or JPEG image that you find online and turn it into a vector using Inkscape. In this video, we'll be doing the same thing, but let's say we use Inkscape and we get our vector, but it's still not quite the way we want the final product to look. So we're going to look at modifying the vector once it's been extracted. So our image this time is going to be a sports logo. And this one also seems like it'll be a nice vector because of how distinct the colors are here. So one would think this will be fairly straightforward, but it's a little bit trickier than that previous example. So copy the image. I'm going to paste it in the work plane now. And just like before, I'm going to hit Trace Bitmap. Play around with the options here until it looks good. It's not working out the way it should. Like I said in the last video, trial and error. It'll work eventually. So once it's good, I hit OK. I close the trace window. I drag the vector off, and there I can see my vector, my bitmap. Bitmap is no good anymore. I want the vector. Now, there's a couple problems with this that aren't immediately obvious. For one, just like the last example, this is a filled-in polygon with no outline. Whereas what I want is the outline with no filling, so I can see exactly what's being cut. Moreover, you may have noticed in the actual original image, there's this trademark logo, and we don't really want that for our final product. We're not using it for any commercial purposes, so I think we're safe. So we need to get rid of that because that's also vectorized. If you look carefully, you see some gunk down here. And even if your image doesn't have a trademark, it may have some JPEG artifacting that you want to get rid of. So anytime you want to get rid of some of these vectors, or these sort of junk vectors or noise, you go back to node editing here, and that'll let you sort of select these points. And if you just click and drag, you can select all of those and just hit the delete key, and you've cleaned up the image significantly. Now, some of them may require a lot of cleanup, in which case it could be a little bit tedious, but the end result will look much better as a result. However, it's important to keep in mind that once again, this is what we're looking at here in black is a filling and not an outline. And what we want is the outline. So just like the last video, we're going to open up the fill and stroke area here. I'm going to turn the filling, which is currently black, into no filling, and make the outline, which is currently not visible, to become visible. And that reveals the nature of our problem. If I were to zoom in here, you'll see that there are actually two basically parallel vectors here, or paths. And if you imagine the vinyl cutter tracing along this path, you'd get sort of a big T and a small t, and you may not get the high quality cut you want because the material might start fraying. Or if you're using the laser cutter, if it cuts along both paths here, it might burn so much that it just makes for kind of a poor quality cut when all you need is one cut. So we need to get rid of one of these layers, or not layers, but one of these sort of stripes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to node editing so I can see all the points here. And I'm going to, first of all, think about, again, this is a stylistic choice, which one I want to delete, which loop I want to delete. So let's say I want to get rid of the inner one and I want to keep the outer loop so I get the bigger version of the T. So I'm going to select one of the nodes of the one I want to delete, which is the inner loop here. And let me zoom out so this next part's a bit more visible. So I'm going to select one of those nodes. I'm then going to hold the control key and then scroll the mouse wheel. And if you look carefully, you'll see that in both directions, or at least in one direction here, the nodes along this loop are slowly sort of turning on or becoming selected. If you look carefully, you see some blue lights sort of lighting up there. That's the other nodes in this loop. So that means the entire path is selected, and if I hit the delete key, you'll see that the entire inner loop is now gone. So one can imagine the laser cutting along this line, making an extremely sharp, nice cut, and not having that inner layer of gunk that we didn't want for our final product. Sometimes you have to make modifications like this to your vector. The algorithm by which vectors are extracted is inherently going to get confused between the signal and the noise. But in this case, with a little bit of trial and error and some human ingenuity, you can figure out how to turn the machine result into a much cleaner final product. Now, if you're, so because the T here, the edges were quite clean just from the algorithm, if some of your, corners or your edges or your curves were not quite to your liking, once you're in node editing, what you can do is just without deleting the handles, just grab some of them and push and pull until they are where you like them to be. So if your image through the vectorizing process didn't look quite the way you expected, you can go back and hand modify it as you wish. You can also play with these handles and modify the nature of the curvature that way. But once it is to your liking, of course, make sure it all fits on the plane. So let me shrink this a bit. I'm not really making the object any smaller because this is a scalable vector. I can always change the scale later without losing any quality. But now that it fits on there, I'm going to hit File, Save. And again, just like last video, be sure to save it as both an SVG and a PDF just to be on the safe